Hi and welcome back. Here in the UK it's still quite chilly and very wintry, but the first signs of spring are beginning to show, which is really encouraging. And one of the first things that we see is the beautiful snowdrops just peeping out of the wintry gardens, out of the frost and the snow. They just lift their little white and green heads and look so pretty. So I'm going to paint some snowdrops today. Nice and easy. I've drawn out the shape of the flowers in pencil using a reference photo from Pixabay as a general guide. There are lots of photos of snowdrops on Pixabay which you can look at and just pick out a few flowers and then pencil them in and cover them with masking fluid, just the flowers, not the stems or anything. And I'm going to paint these snowdrops just using two colours. Today I'm going to be using ultramarine blue and gamboge hue. So I wet my paper roughly, not caring about wetting it all over, and then mixed up sort of varying amounts of the blue and the yellow and swept it across my page with my large Pro Art Ron Ranson Harkey brush and then sprayed the marks here and there with my misting spray. My board's at an angle of about 45 degrees and you can see everything running down, and gravity will do most of the work here for me and paint the background if I just let it and give it a chance. The important thing here is to make sure you put plenty of thick paint on because a lot of it gets washed off, as you can see. You can sweep a bit more on while the paper's all still wet. And if you use a good cotton paper, it will stay wet and open and workable for as long as you need it to. This is Saunders Waterford cold press paper, and it's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape. I don't pre-stretch my paper. I find that just taping it at this size and this weight, 140 pounds or 300 grams, and it buckles a bit when it's wet, but as it dries, it flattens out completely. Now I've got the wash to where I want it to be. I'm wiping around the tape where there's pools of water and paint to make sure that doesn't run back into the painting now that I've laid it flat. If that happened, the water could run into the painting and create some nasty marks where the water pushes away at the damp paint and creates what we call blooms or cauliflowers. But I'm going to flick a little bit of water around the top, and that will give me some of those little blooms, but intentional ones. They'll just give me slightly lighter patches. Hardly noticeable once it's dried, but it will just all add to the texture and that blurry background that I'm looking for. The general aim of this graduated wash that I've created as a background for my flowers is to keep it lighter across the top and darker nearer to the bottom, and I've managed to achieve that so far. Now, while it's still wet, I'm going to mix up a slightly darker green from my gamboge and ultramarine blue, and you can see what a lovely range of greens I'm getting just from those two colours. And using my Paulina Bright number 1 round synthetic brush, I'm flicking up the sort of long, thin impressions of the leaves that snowdrops have. Some of them might be a little bit big, but remember this is sort of semi-abstract, it's very loose. I just want to give the impression of these leaves in the background, and because the paper is still damp, my slightly richer, thicker mix of green paint will still soften and diffuse a bit as it dries. And here it is, it's completely dry, and you can see it's dried back a lot lighter, although in real life it's a little bit brighter and more pigmented than it shows here because the sun is again streaming through my windows. Now I'm going to go into the painting and paint some more leaves with slightly darker green with more ultramarine blue and less gamboge in the mix, and continue painting more leaves. I'm sweeping the paint over my snowdrops because they're still protected by the masking fluid, and you can see that I'm starting to build up some darker marks and it's starting to look a bit more convincing behind the snowdrop flowers. And you can do as many or as few leaves as you like, but do remember to try and preserve enough of that lovely paler light coming in from above the paler part of the painting, so that you get your more intense dark greens at the base where the leaves are growing from. And I think that will do. So now I'm going to lay it flat, and just before those new wet paint on dry painting leaves dry, I'm going to spatter with the gamboge and a darker green mixed from the gamboge and the ultramarine blue here and there. And the spatter, where it hits the wet leaves, will diffuse. Where it hits the dry paper, I'll get those nice little dot effects, and it will just add extra texture and extra interest, but without having to fiddle around with detail and paint it in. For some reason, spatter seems to work really well with loose flower paintings. It sort of all adds to the interesting, sort of loose, spontaneous feeling, sort of textures and tones and patterns. Now I've used 3 different brushes there to get the stippling, 2 sort of hog bristle brushes and my Polina Bright. None of them are ideal. I've lost my favourite stippling brush, or spattering brush, so I need to try and find another one. So I was just grabbing anything just to, see what would work. Now that needs to dry completely before I can come back and finish off the painting. So it's all nice and dry, and again it's slightly brighter in real life because the sun is bleaching the colour out a little bit as it comes in through the window, but I'm certainly not complaining about the sun. The next thing I need to do is to remove the masking fluid. So with a clean finger, or use an eraser or the tacky side of some masking tape, and you can rub off and remove the masking fluid. It's made of latex, so it rubs off into little sort of rubbery sticky beads, and it's very easy to remove, and it's also very easy to make sure you've removed it all by feeling with your finger, and you can feel it, and then brush off all the crumbs with a clean dry brush. Now the only thing that's left to do is to put a little bit of detail in, and this is using quite a dark mixture, the darkest mixture that I can get from my ultramarine blue and my gamboge. So I'm just painting these little, not really sure, it's like the sort of bud coverings, sort of little green part that grows from the stem that holds the petals, and then I'm painting back from those little cup-shaped structures. I'm going to paint back and do sort of like umbrella-shaped looping stems, trying to sort of replicate that very typical shape that snowdrops have, which gives them that lovely sort of nodding appearance in gardens. So I'll work across all of my snowdrops in exactly the same way, maybe adding a little bit of gamboge on the left side of those cup shapes and keeping it darker on the right. And you can see how effective that's starting to look now already. They will dry lighter, so I might have to go in and darken some of those up a bit later. Now once that's dry, I shall start to put some shadow into some of the petals. I'm waiting for that to dry completely because I don't want to risk smudging any of those little cups. For my shadow colour, I've chosen to use an incredibly watery mixture of mostly ultramarine blue with a little tiny bit of the yellow into it, just to neutralise it and slightly grey the blue down a bit. and that's going to be painted on the petals on the right side, and those sort of beneath with, or with flowers on top of them, sort of closer to the foreground, if you see what I mean. So I'm leaving plenty of white unpainted paper for the snowdrop petals, but I'm just going to build up hopefully a bit of structure, a bit of shape and form by putting in some shadow. So I'll work across all of the flowers in exactly the same way, and they might need a bit more shadow because, as always, watercolour dries back lighter. And now that I've got the tones pretty much established in my flowers with the shadows, I can darken up the stems and those little cup structures. Again, that's using another layer or glaze of my gamboge and ultramarine blue, mostly blue, to get it nice and dark. When you layer up in this way, you can build up beautiful darks, but without having to use black or grey or anything like that. You can just use these nice fresh colours that mix beautifully. I mean, I certainly think that if you were looking at this painting and you didn't know much about watercolour or watercolour mixing, then I don't think you'd guess that this was painted with only 2 colours. And I think that's just about finished. I will check how it looks first once I remove the tape from the painting and have a look at it with a clean white border. This enables me to sort of see it with fresh eyes, so to speak, and I can see whether or not I might need to add a little bit more shadow into some of those petals here and there. So again, I'll take my very watery mixture of ultramarine blue with a tiny dash of gamboge in it and glaze over some of these areas, not much, just here and there, and another coat will build up the tone so I get slightly darker tone without it looking too heavy. And I think I'm happy with that. I'm going to call that finished for my first try at painting snowdrops. I think it's a nice, easy painting. I think if you take it step by step and make sure that you get nicely drawn snowdrop flowers from reference photographs that you can find online, get those masked out and then have fun with your background. And letting it dry between the stages so that you don't smudge anything, and just trying to use as fewer brush strokes as possible to keep the painting looking nice and fresh and spring-like. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to my lovely Patreon group who support this channel. And I'll see you again soon, and happy painting. Bye.